This morning's scripture reading is 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. Be joyful always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus.
Good morning, and thanks for having me down. Again, my name is Greg Cooper. My wife's name is Heidi, and she's with me. We've got two boys, a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. The 18-year-old is working this afternoon, and the 15-year-old is helping out in service, so they couldn't be with us. But we're glad to be here. I've had an opportunity around Colorado to do this at some other congregations, but I am by no means a super polished preacher, so you have to help me out there and just indulge me a little bit throughout this time. 2026 is upon us, so I'd like to welcome you into the new year. It's a great time of the year, the beginning or the end, or however you want to look at it, because the message this morning I think is going to dovetail nicely with the study. One of the things that you said, Brad, was dreaming can happen after a crisis and before a storm. And I think even people that are going through tough times, when you cross over to that new year, it adds a little bit of peace, because you're like, you know what, I've gone through this tough year maybe, or I'm in the midst of some trial, but everybody around the world, or at least certainly here, the people that we know in developed countries, they look at this new year and they're like, okay, this is a reset. Next year's going to be better, or I'm glad that's over with. And so we're going to talk about it. I try to when I go to other places, I try to do something that's relevant. I don't know much about Walsenburg. We got a little bit of history. It's a crossroads town. I thought that was pretty cool. But I don't know a lot. And I thought, around the new year, what's not more relevant than New Year's resolutions? And so I wanted to spend a little time, and I did some studying on that. And I think that appropriate to the prayer that was made this morning, we're going to discuss a parable that I think really will pair nicely with New Year's resolutions. But how about a little backstory? Earliest New Year's resolutions were really from the Babylonians about 4,000 years ago. This would have been around the time of Abraham. They would make these, and if they weren't kept, they felt that their gods would not have good favor on them. Julius Caesar, right around the turn of, I think it was around 43 AD or so, established January 1st as the new year, believing that Janus, who is the god of doors and windows, could look forward and backward in time. And so he established 1/1 as the new year. And Romans would then offer sacrifices, thinking that there would be favor shown upon them if they would make these resolutions and offer sacrifices. The founder of the Methodist Church, John Wesley, in 1740, he created the Covenant Renewal Service as a special service on New Year's Eve, alternative to the partying and the raucous events that would go on from the pagans and non-believers around the world. But they would sing hymns, they would pray, and then they would have New Year's resolutions, things that they were going to do better. Many Protestant churches would follow. They would hold New Year's Eve services, and they would pray, and they would sing songs, and they would make resolutions for the new year. But these days, New Year's resolutions are mainly secular. Most of us have probably talked to somebody in the last couple weeks, or will talk to somebody in the next couple weeks, that will say something about the resolution. Just like when you get around Lent, someone's going to give up meat or whatever for so long. And about 45% of people, as of 2015, when the report came out, make resolutions, and 8% of those people keep them. So you're thinking about 4% of people out there actually can keep a commitment throughout the year. Does that make it a bad thing? I don't think so. I mean, we talk about dreaming. We aspire to good things and doing things better. And I think the question becomes is, why do we do this? Some of you remember the Calvin and Hobbes. Resolutions me? Just what are you implying? That I need to change? Well, buddy, as far as I'm concerned, I'm perfect in every way I am. Right? We don't, most people don't believe that about themselves. They want self-improvement. They're thinking, I've got a diet, I've got to exercise. I just started a carnivore diet. I'm in my 40s now, and my metabolism isn't what it used to be. I used to be an ultra runner. I'm not doing that anymore. And so I'm starting to see things that I don't like in the mirror. I'm like, I'm gonna get on this carnivore diet. I've been exercising a little bit. We'll see how long it lasts. I don't get into New Year's resolutions. Some people, for personal growth, they're gonna read self-help books, or they're gonna go get their degree or some certifications in something. They want to motivate some positive change. They want to be a better friend or be a better brother, or they've got something where they want to motivate somebody to do something positive. Some people, it's karma. When I used to ultra run, there's this thing called trail karma. So I'm on a 50-mile run, and if I see a piece of trash, I pick it up. And if I pick it up, the guy that I'm running alongside, because it's a long race, you're out there for 10 hours plus or whatever, and I'm like, trail karma. I think maybe at the end of the race, I don't actually believe that. Just being a good steward to the environment. Like, you don't want to see plastic wrappers on the trail. But people do. They believe in karma. They say, if I do enough good things, Zig Ziglar said, you do enough good for other people, you're going to get what you want. And some people, they carry this into a New Year's resolution. People do it for hope. You have something, you're like, I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to be good. It's going to make me appreciate the hope and get towards that thing I'm dreaming for. And it releases chemicals in our brain, the dopamine. It is a studied thing. How about purpose or fulfillment? If there's any business owners out here, I'm a business owner. We talked about this morning in a study that we had one that crashed and burned. When 2 years into it, called my wife. I says, well, we got the first one out of the way. Let's start over, right? But we have ambitions and dreams. That was the crisis. We had a little bit of time. I decompressed. I'm like, okay, let's dream up something. Now, you could call that a resolution. You could call it goals. You could call it whatever you want. But I needed something that was going to give me purpose. That failed business, what it taught me was, where my goals were going in that other business, I thought were kind of aligned with God, but not really. And now I've got a more focused approach. In the new business, it's more aligned, I think, with what the Lord wants. I hope. I just got to listen. But there's purpose and fulfillment. So we do have these goals. And I was thinking, okay, now when I'm going to talk on this, do I come up with a couple examples about resolutions in the Bible? Is there a parable I can come up with? And I think I came across something that we can all appreciate. You can open your Bibles or follow along. All the verses are going to be up on the screen. They're from the ESV, and I'm not super fast at flipping through it, so I thought it'd just be easy to put them up on the screen. And thank you for having it working. I went to another congregation a few weeks ago, and I was under the impression they had PowerPoint, and I found out they didn't. They had the screen, but you had to bring your own computer. Anyway, we'll go ahead and start in Luke 16 at the beginning of the chapter, where Jesus is speaking his parables. It says, he also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is that? What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do since my master is taking my management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. And you might be saying, what does this have to do with resolutions? Right? I think what it has to do is we are all like this manager, right? We have been given talents. Maybe this is really talking about money and things, and how he was handling accounts. But we've got an account, we've got talents, and we've got resources. And some of us have been blessed with personalities that I'll never get to, and an emotional intelligence that my wife calls me emotionally retarded. I'm self-described as emotionally retarded, not one of my talents. But there's other things that I could do to help people. I call myself a construction therapist. I've built $500 million worth of work. If you've got a problem in construction, there's a good chance that I know how to help. That's one of the things I do up in Castle Rock is if a residential homeowner calls me, I come out and I consult them for free, and I'll even provide them a report so they can take it to their lawyer and file a construction defect case or whatever they want to do. And that's just like a little thing I can do to help maybe bless somebody. But the point is that we all have things that we can do to go out and help others and handle those accounts God's been giving us in a righteous way, in a right way. And here, he's challenged. And we all get challenged at the end of the year because we're like, okay, in this coming year, what can I do better for God, for my family, for work, or whatever, for my health, for my sanity? And so he's saying, he's like, wow, I've been challenged now, and it's all going to get taken away. I need to change. And we're all struggling with this. We're suffering through things, and we start, and we're like, is this really a problem? And we get to a point where it's in our face, and we know that it's a problem. And we get to be like Paul in Romans 7 and 15. He says, for I do not understand I don't know why I'm doing these things. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. And this is the battle of this flesh. He goes on and says, for I have the desire to do what is right, but do not have the ability to carry it out. My son Zachary, he's the oldest. When he was about 7 or 8 years old, we were studying this passage in a Bible study, Kenosha, Wisconsin. And in Kenosha, there's a lot of elderly. And we had some kids too, which is pretty cool, but they run all over the church building. Right? All of them except our kids. Most of them except our kids. The rule was no running in the church building. I didn't want him knocking anybody over. And, he's going through this. And after we get a Bible study, they get out of their classes and they come upstairs, and he's running around. Pulled him aside. I said, Zachary, why are you running? He says, Dad, I know I'm not supposed to be running, but my brain just isn't working. And I says, he gets it. He gets it. This is exactly where, the way that God makes stars align is quite amazing. But here's a kid, and he's just a little guy, and he gets it. It's a true story. And we do that too. If we're honest with ourselves, we say, we're trying to do these good things, and we're just having a really hard time getting them done, or being consistent, or we slip back into something. And so I think a point similar to this was made this morning. And I don't know if it was Tony Robbins or 100 other people that said this, but the first time I ever heard a statement similar to this was in an economics class at Carthage. This was how I understand economics, because economics is really not about money, it's about human behavior, right? Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. So I think we need to think about that when we're examining ourselves. Okay, if we're going to come up with goals, or if we're going to come up with a resolution or a dream or whatever we're going to call it, we got to understand that. Okay, why? What is the pain we're in? And this is what's heartbreaking: is the people that don't believe, the people that don't have the Lord in their life, they have no idea what they're missing. They don't know the kind of pain that they're in. And sometimes you kind of like, man, sometimes you're like, that'd be kind of nice. But now that we're definitely better off. Let's go on in Luke in chapter 16 still, verse 4 through 7. It says, I've decided what I'm going to do. I've decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said, take your bill and write 80. And, it's interesting. We kind of do this. We didn't know from the first couple passages whether that, it's like, what makes this guy dishonest? We haven't really learned anything. And even here, we don't even know if this is the dishonest part. If you really kind of break it down, you're like, which is the dishonest part here? But the craftiness of it, he gets commended. We'll read about in just a second. But when we think about New Year's resolutions, we think about our aspirations and our dreams and our goals. Think about why you've maybe been successful and maybe why you haven't, and try to correlate where it's worked and where it hasn't. Historically, I've had a pretty big problem professionally, is that I get super excited about I am meant to be in construction. I'm pretty good at it. I can just take something and rip it apart and figure it out, and I can explain it in a way that other people that know nothing about construction can understand, which is pretty cool. And I get dreams, and I get aspirations in business, and I blast it out on the wall because I'm so excited. So I tell everybody I know. And I was reading this book by Peter Thiel, And he references this part in this opera that's played by Faust, or it's called Faust. It's in part one, and I can't pronounce that German name or whatever it is, but it's talking about secrets. And what Peter Thiel says, and he's one of the founders of PayPal, but what he says, a person with a secret that can do good, with an aspiration that's a secret that can do good, is basically useless. He says, but if you go and you tell everybody, it's harmful because people will be out there to hurt you. He says, but if you find that sweet spot in the middle, now you've got a company because you have competitive advantage because you've told exactly who needs to know. And so this statement, I love it. It says, the few who knew what might be learned, speaking of secrets, foolish enough to put their hearts on show and reveal their feelings to the crowd below, mankind has always crucified and burned. Now, Jesus was pretty exposing of a lot of things that people did not want to hear. And I think it hurt him. And so when we say that, you know what, I'm going to quit this thing or I'm going to start doing this thing, and we tell everybody we know, have we ever run into those people that really don't align with that thing we're trying to get to, that goal? And then they try to hurt us. They try to drag us back into, they say when the problem with crabs, you can put crabs in a boiling pot of water. You guys ever heard this illustration? So the thing about crabs you'll notice is that the other crabs will pull the one in that's trying to get out. And that's really kind of what I'm trying to get at here. So when we're setting a goal, tell the people who you know that are going to help build you up. And I think we can find support in that in Galatians 6, verses 1 through 2, where it says, brothers, if anyone's caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And what's important here is I don't think this is saying that, if something's going on, we need to broadcast it to everybody in this congregation. Right? I mean, we've got 250 people that show up on a Sunday morning in Castle Rock. If there's sin going on and things, I don't think the idea is that everybody there needs to know about that and everybody's going to bear up. Right? What he's saying here is, man, keep that circle, the people that are going to help build you up, keep them in that circle to help be part of that solution. And so when you go back to that manager, he's out there telling everybody, so much so that it gets back to his, the rich guy, the boss. And so let's continue in Luke 16, beginning in verse 8, where it says, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. We'll come back to the shrewdness in a second. But this last part where it says, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So this kind of really fits in nicely with what I was just saying. He says, the eternal dwellings here, I do not think are positive. He says, make friends for yourself by unrighteous wealth. He says, when that happens, it will fail, and you're going to find yourself in a place you don't want to be. But he commended him for being shrewd. And we don't use that word. I think if you just hear the word shrewd, does it sound positive? It doesn't sound positive. Is it positive? Do you actually know what I see some shaking up. It actually is positive. He gets commended for it because he planned. He says, I wish that you planned with the good people like you planned with the bad people. Now, if somebody came to you and they said, let's say there's a place in Castle Rock and they have it's called Bud's Bar, but they have the best burgers and it's cash only. It's like, let's say you go out and you have a big party and they go there, it's cash only, and the bill that comes out it's cash only. It's $100. And the waitress comes out and says, oh, just give me whatever. And you can see there's some kind of angle there. Would you say, no, I'm fine paying the full amount or whatever? Or would you say, wow, man, I got a pretty good deal today? And that's really what this manager was doing. He was dishonest with the account somewhere. But the idea is that the shrewd is having and showing sharp powers of judgment. And so when I shut down our last company, I started a new company. It's called Sagax, is how it's actually supposed to be pronounced. I call it Sajax because the other one's weird. But it's Sagax Construction, and it's Latin, and it means shrewd. It means of keen or quick perception. So shrewd is. Then the point is, when you get to these plans, certainly align yourself with God through prayer, but make the plan. It's commendable. God says he commended him because, man, I wish you planned with your brethren like you planned with these other guys that you shouldn't be working with. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I had no idea that until I got into that my company name would actually fit in nicely with that. Continuing on in Luke 16, beginning in verse 10, it says, "One who is faithful in little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God in money. You cannot serve God in time. You cannot serve God in your beauty. You cannot serve God and any other thing, fill in the blank." He's talking about how we're handling accounts here. But how about accounts of our talents? How about accounts of our personalities and the gifts that he's bestowed on us? There's a poem I actually was listening to a podcast several weeks ago, and I had it written up on my whiteboard. There was two things I heard from the podcast that I wrote in my office, in my house. And the first one is comparison is a thief of joy. And so I've kept that up there, and that's a fact. And the second one was a poem, Man in the Glass. And I'm going to read that here in just a second. Now, what's interesting about poems is my wife hates poems, but we're knocking on 20 years of marriage. I wrote poems when basically before we were married. And since then, I've decided to keep the bar very low. And I think that we've been pretty happy since then. So a couple poems in this I guess, presentation this morning. I don't read a lot of them, but they'll get you thinking. Man in the Glass. When you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for a day, just go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in your life is the one staring back from the glass. He's the fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear to the end. And you've passed your most difficult, dangerous test, if the man in the glass is your friend. You may fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass. But your final reward will be heartache and tears if you've cheated the man in the glass. In Hollywood, we see sitcoms or, we see people on the news and, they've had these great, awesome careers and all these accolades and they're respectable. And then you find out at the end that they've swindled people and they've wronged people all along the way. And that's what this is talking about. And so it's like, if you're faithful in little, be faithful in much. Who's going to trust you to true good riches if you can't do it the right way? And so I really appreciate this. And I think that, it's tough, especially in business, because there's a lot of opportunity to do things the wrong way. And, whether most people are doing things the wrong way or not, who knows? There's a guy that I used to work for, and, he says, we want to be right and we want to be legal, we want to be ethical, but we want to be on the right side of ruthless. And so he really kind of liked to play in the gray area, I think, sometimes. And, whether there's something going on there or not, I don't know. But I think that at the end of the day, we got to go home and we got to look in the mirror and know who we are and feel good about the decisions that we're doing, about those goals that we're making, and how we're planning that out, and who we're aligning ourselves with. But what's important is that in Matthew 22:39, certainly we should love God first. But it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. How can you love your neighbor if you don't love yourself first? And how do you look into that mirror and love yourself if you're not living the right way, if you're not doing things the right way, and you're not ethical and upright and moral about things. Because it is up to us. In Philippians 2:12 it says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It's not your wife, your mother, your brother, your father, your aunt, your uncle, anybody that you know, your mentor, that's going to get you saved. It's going to be the person staring back in the glass. And I think that's important to remember. And in closing, in Titus 2:11 and 12, it says, the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age. And so as we're embarking on this new year, there's a couple things that are extremely important. Where are you at with God? But if you're in with him and you're making your plans, and it's not too late, it's the 4th, so it's not too late to sit down and consider where you're at. What goals? What am I going to do better? What am I not going to do? What can I stick to? Who are the close people around me that I can trust to help bear up these burdens that maybe I'm dealing with? Or maybe I can bear them up. Who can I bless when I get out of bed every day? So that's really what I want folks to think about is, have goals. You don't have to call it a New Year's resolution. I don't. I'm pretty assertive that I don't do New Year's resolutions, mainly because, I don't gamble either because the house always wins. I lose. When I do play cards with some friends from the church, and I just call it pain to hang out with my friends. I don't call it gambling because I never win, right? But I don't enter into losing arrangements, but that doesn't mean it's not okay to plan. I plan for my company. I plan for my business. There's trips we want to go on. There's missions that we want to go do. And so when we're thinking about those things, make sure we're, hopefully this helps guide that path. And hopefully this is helpful for all of you. And I think we're about to sing a song. And I guess that's the invitation, is to think about those things.